All right, and then last question from at JuiceBox. Explain the difference between retro video game preservation and every retro video game being available to download for free. I think some people don't know there is a difference.
Okay. I'm going to keep it pretty simple here without getting into a ton of nuance.
Please have nuance so we got a full topic.
Well, I mean, it is a fair, I mean, it's enough. I know I can talk myself into a hole here. Part of video game preservation is having everything available out there so that it can be researched, played, explored, looked at. That's important. You need to have an archive of everything. You need to be able to access it. And yes, that can be phrased as such as being able to play all video games for free. Sure. I mean, that's one way of wording it.
Sure.
Absolutely. What it makes video game preservation different than just looking at it is playing video games is true video game preservation is making sure that everything is there, warts, bugs, errors, problems, and all, as well as documentation, everything that goes around it. So, for instance, a classic example of video game preservation is Oregon Trail. It's one of those games that is, as far as I know, still, as of a year or two ago, has never really truly been properly preserved. The version that's always around, the Apple II version that's always around, always has the gravestone that you can find that says, "Here lies," I think it's Dave, pepperoni and cheesy. It's the copy that was ripped. It's the copy that's been floating around, but it had a save on there. It had a save with that gravestone on there. It's not original. It's not as it was intended. It's not the genuine article. It's not clean. It's not clear. Mm-hmm. So video game preservation at the end of the day is a true preserving of the genuine article as it was. No bugs, no modifications, nothing like that.
Sure.
I believe it was when Socks the Cat came out. I think it was Socks the Cat. It was dumped, but there was concern because
they altered it.
They altered a bug and altered an intro, and they were holding on to the original ROM.
Which I don't think they ever released the original one.
Don't know.
I haven't looked into that in a while, but yeah.
Don't know, and I'm not going to get into like a huge thing on that. But
that was alarming to me.
That's alarming, and that would be an instance of, okay, the game's out there, but for historical, accurate preservationist purposes, that game is not, at least publicly, preserved. It's like having a reproduction of a painting out there, yes, but not the actual painting. It's like
having a colorized old film instead of the black and white.
Precisely.
Yeah.
So to me, that is kind of where you really get into the big differences between preserving and just playing. When you're preserving, some of that stuff is actually not going to be playable. But video game preservation is also, it's not just ROMs, it's not just playing the games, it's also the documentation, the boxes. When we get to things like we talked about it before once on when it was when they put the versions of the emulated versions of the handheld games on there. A large part of it is the casing, the packaging, because yes, that was a big part of how the game played and made you feel. There's a lot of aspects to preservation that go beyond just the game itself on a screen.
Sure. I think there's with video gamers, there's always a sense of entitlement that I have not seen to that extent with other forms of entertainment. Where because when it comes to movies, I've never seen someone say, I want all the movies available for free.
Right.
I've never seen someone say, I want every single piece of music available for free. I've never seen
No.
That. And maybe because it's just older generations that weren't used to that. They used to originally with movies, you had to go to your theater and a matinee to watch them. You couldn't even watch them on TV, at first until they started coming, I think, in the 60s. So with video gamers, it's always been, and this is because emulation is such a great thing, and you can so easily download. And most of these games are up until the early 2000s. All these games are easily downloadable. They're small. I mean, it was miraculous when I found out all the arcade ROMs were minuscule and tiny for the most part. It's like, what? It's like most of these, even like these beat 'em up games, they're small. There's a small amount of information. So the ease of it, I think, gave gamers a sense of entitlement. And just because it was easy and free, it should always be for everything forever. And so when Nintendo went after Love ROMs, who went over the line with offering in-browsing emulation. I'm sorry they did. I'm not on Nintendo's team, but Nintendo allowed a lot of those ROM sites to exist forever and ever and ever. And they could have tried to go after them at any time. They didn't. It went over the line. So then when Cool ROM said, oh, we're going to get rid of our stuff, and also Emu Paradise, people were like, well, Nintendo's doing this, and now this is a bad day for game preservation. It's like, no, it's not a bad day for game preservation. It's a bad day to have these games easily accessible to play immediately.
All right, the games are still preserved.
The games are all preserved.
Yes.
The ROMs are all preserved even somewhere. They're technically all preserved on the cartridges.
Yeah.
If you want to get super technical, every game is preserved as long as you have a physical version of it somewhere that you can pull the ROM from. If you want to get super technical.
Well, yeah, but I mean that's for cartridges. I mean,
Sure.
with floppy disks and things like that, that's where actually having a digital archive of it is important.
But the argument with those two sites were about these
sure.
NES games and Super Nintendo and N64.
Yes, fair
That's
enough.
the argument.
Because any real archivist will tell you an actual digital copy is not preservation. You need the physical copy.
Yeah, so that's why I thought it was a bunch of crocodile tears, or not. What's the proper term? I think people were a little bit going over the top with that, thinking it was
A little
the
bit of
end
histrionics.
A little bit of histrionics, including some people that I know and love, were like, "This is bad. It makes it less easily accessible. You can't get at it." If these ROMs are out there in so many people's hard drives, so many torrents, you can get at these.
I say, remember torrents?
You don't have to go off on the street and like say, "Hey, you got that Atari ROM set available?" Like, this shit is taken care of for video games. I would argue that these video games are more and more getting, even the earlier ones are better documented than all the early films. There's so many lost forever that we don't know about. Like, and people have sort of accepted that. So where video games, again, I think that it's a different crowd versus movies or TV shows, or especially music, where no one's like, I have to get at it.
I will make two points to that. One, I think the reason why maybe the video game community gets a little jumpy is because we've talked about in the past. I think the video game community has realized we're at this point where maybe more so than other forms of media, we can get in earlier than most and hopefully stop ourselves from losing things.
Sure.
Before other, types of media have, before, like, okay, we're aware now and we can do this, and our history doesn't go that far back.
Sure.
So maybe they're a little jumpy about that. Okay, you don't need to be that jumpy, but I can understand that to a degree. Two, the only thing I would say to you about the movies and the music thing and people who play games wanting them for free, I'm not saying that they should feel like they should have them all for free, but there have been many avenues made by the people who hold the rights for movies and music to purchase those. There are almost no avenues to legally purchase ROMs and games for so many of these companies. There's tons of them.
In the pantheon of entertainment, if it's popular, it gets re-released, right? So Elvis records and Beatles have been re-released and be available forever. The most popular video games mostly have been re-released in some form. Mostly, the marquee ones have been.
It's still vastly different between music, movies, and games, though.
Sure, but there's still...
I mean, there's time.
But there's still movies that were never redone after they put on a VHS. Like, they're still never put on a DVD or Blu-ray. I'm not saying it's proper,
sure.
Right? But those movies are still preserved.
Yes.
You just can't easily get at them.
Yeah. I'm just saying, I think the reason... all I'm saying is I think the reason why... people who want to preserve games automatically assume free is because it's just been that way for so long, because for so long there has been no other way to access these games besides free, even if you go looking for a way to pay for them.
And I would argue technically that's not the form of it, though. You know what I mean? That's not the full form of it. It's not just the digital information.
No, and I agree with that. But I think that's why they think free, because for so long they've had to default to free. Whereas with music... I've never really had to default to free if I don't want to, even if I'm looking for obscure shit. Right now, I can think of almost any of the most obscure shit I listen to, and right now, probably find it for purchase online.
Everything's on YouTube now. Like YouTube's become like what Napster you couldn't envision with Napster, where you don't have to even download the music anymore. I can type in any song and it'll be on YouTube. And most of the time, the artist gets a cut of that. Yeah. Like, so that's the good news. Like that, it's interesting how that's happened. It's become like a jukebox system. But you're right. There's no jukebox system for video games at this point in time. No. Where maybe every time you play the game, the publisher gets a piece of it through an advertisement. Hey, maybe that's an avenue in the future. I'd be open to that, right? A pre-roll before you play the game for 30 seconds.
In general, I pirate until I can pay. That's what I do.